All right, and we'll go ahead and get going. It's 12:02. Welcome, everyone who's joined us today for the Lunch and Learn. Today we'll be covering grant fraud awareness and federal grant budgets. We'll have three presenters for you today. Jason Oberhausen is our OMB American Rescue Plan team's compliance and reporting specialist. Dexter Thomas is our OMB American Rescue Plan lead compliance specialist. And then we'll have Marja Friedman, who is a compliance specialist on our OMB American Rescue Plan team. Time allowing, we'll be able to answer any questions following all of the content that will be covered today. So if you could hold those or direct them to the chat, and another member of our team will answer those for you. And if everyone could please make sure that they're muted so no background noises or anything distracts the presenters and the content being covered. So we'll jump right in. I believe Jason is first, and he'll be covering grant fraud awareness. So I'll kick everything over to you, Jason. I believe you're muted, Jason.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Jason Oberhausen. I'm the grant compliance specialist, and I will be covering the fraud awareness portion of today's presentation. So our objectives today are on the screen, and managing risk is the responsibility of everybody on today's presentation. Your individual duties are going to vary based on your role and level of involvement, and some of those duties are going to range from simply understanding the potential for fraud, implementing strategies to mitigate risk, and in the event of fraud, even post-fraud cleanup and remediation. And I do want to note the specific use of when in the last bullet point. 3 facts are generally true when it comes to fraud: that it has happened, it's happening right now, or it has yet to happen. So let's just dive right in. What is fraud? So the dictionary.com, the Webster Dictionary definition is right there in the middle of the screen in red. But what is it? So in short, grant fraud occurs when the recipients attempt to deceive the awarding agency about their spending or use of the money. And many of those behaviors can take many shapes and forms. So why should we care? Why are we here? Why are we covering this topic? When fraud occurs within the federal agency and the programs, it wastes taxpayers' dollars. It harms the integrity of the programs that we create or we're servicing, whereby eroding the public trust in what we're doing, and can often harm the communities that we're trying to enrich and serve. So why commit fraud? We could host an entire series on why fraud occurs, but in the end, almost every instance of fraud contains the element of the fraud triangle. So the fraud triangle consists of the 3 items on your screen: opportunity, motive and pressure, and rationalization. So we're starting at the bottom right of the screen, motive and pressure. There can be several reasons that drive a person to commit fraud, and you'll often hear that greed is the primary motive, which can be the case. And there are attention-grabbing headlines, drug abuse, gambling addiction, those type of issues that would lead an individual to be motivated to commit fraud. But there can also be more simple and delicate issues, such as financial pressures at home, a spouse or partner losing their job, medical bills from a sick or parent loved one, and simply not able to make ends meet. And to be clear, many people suffer from these life pressures and don't resort to fraud, but oftentimes these are some of the motivating factors when fraud does occur. So rationalization. Oftentimes when fraud is uncovered and the individual is faced with it, they tend to have rationalized why they committed the act. They deserved it. They were overworked, underpaid. They, whoever they is that they were committing the fraud against, won't miss it. You'll hear that they were just going to borrow it. They'll put it back. Whatever the case may be, the pressure at home, the pressure within themselves led to the rationalization. And then last but not least, the opportunity, the ways and when to act on it. And this, again, can take many shapes or forms. Some of the items that we'll touch on today is maybe forgery of a check, setting up a fake charity, turning your back and leaving the safe or the drawer open. Any of those could be opportunities as part of this triangle that when you have a motive or a pressure driving you, you then begin to rationalize that behavior. All that is then needed is the opportunity to commit the fraud. So common fraud areas related to grants. Number one, policies and procedures or lack thereof. Number 2 and 3 are a little bit commingled here with the falsified or fraudulent financial reporting, reimbursement eligibility schemes. When I get to a later slide and we talk about some real life instances of fraud, we'll touch on number 2 and 3. And while we won't get into much of it here today, number 4, procurement, contracts, and bidding are all areas where fraud is able to occur on a grant. And there are many others, but we're going to focus on these 4 today. Number 1, the lack or incomplete procedures. So going back to that opportunity from the fraud triangle, if there's not checks and balances in place and those other 2, rationalization and the motivation, are there, it is a ripe opportunity for fraud occurs. So whether that's some type of check and balances, 2 sets of eyes, separation of roles and duties, in addition to the documented policies and procedures, that is a way to, the way that fraud can happen, and also a way to mitigate it, which we'll touch on. Number 2 and 3, bank statements, W-2s, pay stubs, all items that we would ask an individual to present, some type of government document. Just because it's a government document doesn't mean that it can't be duplicated, counterfeited, or forged in some way. So when we are reviewing those types of items, we want to take time. Do they actually add up? And I mean that literally and figuratively. When you're adding up the items on a W-2, a pay stub, an invoice, oftentimes the fraudsters will, they're lazy. They will cut corners. So simply taking the time to add those things up to perform a level of verification. And number 4, procurement. Conflicts of interest is a area for fraud to occur throughout the procurement process, and bid rigging and other kickback schemes, which we may not have time to touch on. So internal controls. There is a very good reason to have internal controls. One, because the 2 CFR states that we have to have them. So having written documented procedures and internal controls are a requirement. The training of the staff on those internal controls, adhering to them, those are the intent behind it. So it's great to have them, but it's even better to follow them. Fraud mitigation. So we know what fraud is. We have some idea why an individual or individuals would commit fraud. So what can we do to help minimize the risk of associated with fraud as it pertains to our grants? So as G.I. Joe would say, knowing is half the battle. So we're here today. We're participating in a training. We are open and willing to educate ourselves about the risk of fraud. And now that we have that, we need to take some of this back. And the reason that OMB and LAT are hosting this training is the communication about it. We can't be blind to the facts that it does happen, hopefully not to us, but around us. So the more that we talk about it, the more that we create that communication, the more that we can have a sense of controls when it comes to fraud. We want to maintain a well-designed, tested system of those controls that we just mentioned. So again, it's good to document them, but let's test them, run them through, work through scenarios with your team and your staff to make sure that these controls are robust enough and actually match the risk that your grant or grants present when it comes to fraud. We want to identify any potential conflicts of interest. These can be numerous, so we won't go into all the types of conflicts of interest, but when we touch on some of these real-world grant experiences, I'll highlight how just a very basic one can present a large risk. Follow up on unresponsive grantees. What's really going on? So we've given them the money. Now we need to make sure what they are doing is what they stated that they are stated they would do with the funds in the application and throughout that process. So the ongoing monitoring of the grantee or the subawards are all ways that you and those around you can help mitigate some of the risk associated with the fraud. And I mentioned the numerous steps in the process that fraud could occur. And this little diagram here, the fraudulent flow of funds, highlights that throughout the lifespan of the grant, from the request to the application review, all the way through to when the grantee receives those funds, those little red dollar signs there are the attempts at fraud and the execution of fraud. So those can be commingled through all of the relevant and noteworthy elements and aspects of the grant process, and where we want to award the money out and see the benefit that's going to occur throughout the community as the result of the acts behind these grants. But it can be very tricky to watch for that. So we have to make sure that these don't get blurred and mixed in our day-to-day if we don't approach each scenario, each applicant, from the approval to the award with the attention and detail that they deserve. So here are some real world examples of fraud that I found and thought would be noteworthy to share with us, with the group here today. Here is a case where the case manager and the agent were working together. So we talk about that conflict of interest. And we have several grants that are designed to reach the unhoused and veteran population within our city. So that's why I chose this example. But here's an instance where the approving agency and the recipient were co-conspirators and now co-defendants in their act of committing this fraud. So by directing the funds to a vendor that was controlled by, in this case, her friend, no rent was ever paid on behalf of the veterans. So a huge loss and detriment, not just to the funds, but to the impacted population that this grant was intended to serve. So a very unfortunate situation here, but if we go back to those internal controls, separation of duties and checks and balances, just some simple basic tasks could have potentially helped prevent this instance of fraud. Another example here is where a director of a food service program has since been sentenced to prison. And according to the court documents, this fraudster admitted that over a 2-year period, she submitted inflated meal counts on forms for reimbursement. And in some cases, the meals were either not served or they were served, but the number of them were inflated. And again, checks and balances. The very simple task of going out and observing are these acts taking place in the community are one ways that fraud mitigation tips and tricks could have been implemented to minimize this. So a very unfortunate, here we have hungry school children in an after-school meal service program that the money was intended to serve that went to line this individual's pocketbook. Here's a local instance where a Louisville woman falsely exaggerated the number of employees and payroll expenses of the entity that she was representing on the applications for CARES Act and PPP program. I named her here. A Google search will return that, so I'm not outing or divulging anything private here. But this individual now faces 7 counts of federal offenses relating to just under $120,000 that was misdirected and stolen from the PPP loan program. And just some simple math, if she were to be convicted, it would be 140 years maximum that she would serve in prison. We can debate whether she will or won't serve that maximum, but in this scenario, hypothetically, she would. That $117,000 results to about $840 per year per prison. So if we're looking at that cost benefit, truly we would all agree that this would not seem like a risk somebody was willing to take. But when we go back to that fraud triangle, we don't know what motives were pushing this individual, nor do we know how she rationalized it. But what we do know is that the real world example is that $117,000 went missing. So another real world example of checks and balances and internal controls could have helped prevent or minimize this fraud. Here is another example, and this was recent to OMB. And there is another fraud triangle that those in the fraud community refer to when it comes to checks. The maker of the check, the bank that the check is drawn on, in this case Independence Bank, and the payee of the check, in this case Louisville Metro LLC. So one of these things is not like the other, as I learned with Sesame Street. So the bank where this check was deposited did their due diligence and called to follow up and confirm whether this check made payable to Louisville Metro LLC was Louisville Metro in Murrieta, California. And that fraud triangle of a grantee here in Louisville, Kentucky, a bank in Louisville, Kentucky, but being paid to a recipient in California, that fraud triangle really didn't add up. So in this case, a check was simply stolen out of the mail. We don't have all the direct answers at this point. But what we do know is that this check was stolen out of the mail, diverted to where an entity opened a fake a bank account in the name of Louisville Metro, a fake organization, and tried to deposit and profit off of this check. So I wanted to highlight this as while we all do trust in the mail service, rain, sleet, hell, or snow, we want to be careful about how we, manage funds. In this case, $116,000 just dropped in the mail, got diverted. So, be careful when you're placing those checks in the mail. If we could get those in other means, we would be glad to receive them. So now that we know a little bit about what fraud is, how it can happen, what you can do to help mitigate it, last but not least, we want to talk about communicating your concerns. So just like if you've flown recently, the TSA, if you see something, say something and speak up. So in the Louisville Metro world, we want you to contact your OMB grant compliance specialist via email or your agency contact immediately upon realizing or suspecting fraud. And this presentation will be emailed out afterwards. It does have the American Rescue Plan email address right there. I will also have some of the additional contacts at a federal level and at some agency levels within Louisville Metro and the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And that concludes today's presentation on some fraud. I know that was quick. We could have a whole series, again, as I mentioned, on fraud. But what we wanted to do today was just open your eyes to some high-level areas of how fraud can occur and what your role can be to help mitigate that. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. We will move right now into the federal grant budgeting with Dexter and Marja. So Dexter, I will let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dexter Thomas, the ARP Lead Compliance Specialist. We're going to switch gears here pretty dramatically. Thanks so much, Jason, for that training. That was really interesting and informative, in my opinion. But now we're going to talk about federal grant budgets. I've got an example here pulled up in front of you. Please bear with me. I had a cavity filled in this morning, so my mouth is kind of numb. So if I misspeak, please forgive me. This is a example budget Susan drew up. Most federal budgets look a little different, but this is our template. Your actual budget may look different. We've got, this is just an example, so we've got ABC nonprofit, and the project is youth programming. The total amount of this example budget is $316,000 and change. Our first budget category we're going to discuss is personnel. You can see we have 3 different positions: a youth programming manager, a youth programming coordinator, and tutors. You can see their grant duties. To the side, develop and implement curriculum, manage staff and partners work for the manager. The coordinator is coordinating activities, and the tutors are providing academic tutoring to the participants. So this is a lot of math. You can see their hourly wage, the total number of hours paid during the period, percent of time on the project, and total cost to the grant. So keep in mind that these are W-2 staff. We'll discuss 1099 contractors a little bit later on. Sometimes the commitment of employee hours to the grant will be referred to as FTE, or full-time equivalent, or level of effort. I believe this example would be 2.5 FTE, because if you'll notice, this person in the middle here is only spending 50% of their time on this ARP grant. So that's important to note, because if you were to do the math up here, $38 an hour, 2,080 hours. That comes out to 79 and change. Please remain muted if you're able. But down here, 30 times 2080 would be 60 some $1,000, but because they're only spending 50% of their time on the grant, the cost to the grant is half that, 31,000. So that's important. That's the FTE, or level of effort. That's why I ask for those payroll activity reports, or PARs, so we make sure that we're not paying for your time not spent on the grant. So that's personnel. We're going to move on to fringe benefits. So fringe includes payroll taxes, other personnel expenses. You can see them listed here. It's the same three people here as it is down here. Employer taxes, workers' compensation, health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, 401k contributions. There's a full exhaustive list for all eligible fringe benefits. If you want to refer to the Uniform Grant Guidance, it's the 2 CFR 200, and the code is .431 for all eligible fringe benefits. The same person, they're only spending 50% of their time on the grant, so that's why this cost is half of what this math would be. Some federal grants will let you do 20% or 50% of what the salary is for fringe, instead of this math, just a straight 20 or 50% of the salary. But we can only reimburse for what you actually, what the actual costs are, so that is important. All right, now we're going to discuss, and one thing I'll note here, you can see at the bottom of each category there's a total. So the total personnel across these three positions is 119,000. For fringe, the total for these three is 16,000. Now we're going to talk about contractual labor. These are 1099 contractors, and they're not paid through payroll. You've got 2 coaches that will lead training in various sports. Each coach will work approximately 10 hours a week for a total of 500 hours per coach per year. They're getting paid $50 an hour. We're estimating 1,000 hours. So our contractual labor for our 1099 contractors, we're estimating to be $50,000. We have a few other contractual expenses. There's going to be a bus rental, 2 field trips with the bus rental. We're estimating it would be about $500 a day, so that's $1,000 for the bus rental. There's a contract with Artists Group Incorporated. The program partner will provide 2 art teachers who will teach various art subjects. Each art teacher will work 4 hours per week at a rate of $30 an hour. So our total contractual expenses across these 3 pieces is $63,000. Now let's talk about equipment. We're going to talk about equipment, and right after that, we're going to discuss supplies. These seem similar, but there is a key difference between equipment and supplies. So equipment, it's an item that's worth at least $5,000 by itself. So the definition from the 2 CFR 200 is this: equipment means tangible personal property, including IT systems, having a useful life of more than 1 year and a per unit acquisition cost which equals or exceeds the lesser of the capitalization level established by the non-federal entity for financial statement purposes, or $5,000. So in this example, we have a smart board that will be used for program instruction, and it's going to be used 100% for the funded program. That's important, and I'll get back to that in a minute. We estimate the cost would be $10,000, $500 for the actual smart board, and then $500 to install it for $11,000 total. So this meets that equipment definition because it's at least $5,000. It's going to last longer than a year. At the end of the grant, you would need to dispose of the equipment after the grant period ends. So that's why that is notated there. So since this is being used 100% for the ARP grant funded program, that's important. If it were being used for other purposes outside of the grant, maybe 50% of the time, we would only be able to reimburse half of that. Now, supplies is different than equipment. So these might be all of these are going to be less than $5,000. Here we've got art supplies. For art classes will include items such as, but not limited to, paper, paint, canvases, chalk, brushes, etc. An estimated $100 in art supplies will be consumed each week. So one thing that's important when you're creating these budgets is you don't want to box yourself in. You don't want to be limited to everything that's descripted here. So the key phrases will include items such as, but not limited to. So if you and etc. So if you bought pencils, it's not explicitly stated here, but because of the way you drafted this description, it would be eligible in this category. Sports equipment, sports training, you've got yoga mats, boxing gloves, boxing bags, bats, gloves, balls, etc. The difference between art supplies and sports equipment in this example is that when they're estimating the cost, they estimate that you'll use $100 worth of art supplies and that it will be consumed each week, $100 each week. That's how we came up with this number. The sports equipment is not designed to be used within a week. We expect that these will, if you bought an air compressor, we would expect that would last the life of the grant. So that the sports equipment costs have been estimated based upon research of current equipment costs. So that's an important distinction between these two. And last but not least, we've got some cleaning supplies and sanitizer, cleaning products, hand sanitizer, similar products, approximately $20 a week. So that rounds out our supplies, $12,000. Let's move on to travel. Mileage reimbursement. Travel to events reimbursed at GSA rate of 65.5 cents per mile for approximately 500 miles would be about $327. So what is GSA rate? GSA is an acronym for General Services Administration. It's the federal government. They'll set a per diem rate every October. The current rate was just set this past October at 65.5 cents per mile. We can reimburse up to that 65.5 cents. You cannot charge over that GSA rate. But if your rate is different and you're only doing 40 cents per mile, we could do that as well. We just can't go over that GSA rate. Okay, we're going to talk about rent next and utilities. So in this example, 123 West Main Street, 2 classrooms in this building will be used for the project. The classrooms represent 10% of the total square footage of the center and will be used all hours the center is open. So let's say this building is 10,000 square feet and your 2 classrooms that you're using are 1,000 square feet. So that's 10%. And the rent is $2,000 a month. 12 months in a year, that would be $24,000. But because you're only using 10% of that space, you can only be, if it were a monthly reimbursement, you would only be able to get $240 per month. That's why this number is much lower than what 2012 times $2,000 is. So that's important because it's all about allocation. So it's 100% of time, but it's 10% of the square footage. So if the center were open, that's assuming the center is open 5 days a week. it's open all the time, during business hours. So if it were only open 2 days out of the week, you would only be able to get 40%. So that's important to keep in mind there. So utilities, we've got 3 different examples: electricity, water, internet. Those are pretty standard. It follows the same model as our rent. So it's 10% of the usage on the project. So let's talk water for this example. 2 classrooms again, 10% of the total square footage. If your water bill is around $80 a month, you're using the building the entire time during business hours. 12 times 80 is $960, but you're only using 10%, so it's $96 for this grant. Let's see, we're almost done here. I know this is a lot of math. Other project expenses. This is a category you can list things that aren't necessarily they don't fit into other categories. So meals and snacks for students. Students will be provided with a healthy snack and a healthy meal each day. $4 per student per day. 60 students, 250 days of programming would come out to $60,000. So our total other expenses, this is the meals and snacks, the rent and utilities. Travel might be in there. So we've gone through our whole budget. Our total budget is $316,000. There's one more thing to discuss, and it is indirect costs. So let's talk indirect costs. What are indirect costs? They're costs that you can't really allocate, but is the cost of running a program. Indirect costs are a great way to capture overhead costs you can't directly charge to the grant. So in this example, we've got $27,000 that we're budgeting for indirect costs. Well, how did we come to this number? Indirect costs must be based on federal negotiated indirect rate agreements, or 10% modified total direct costs, or MTDC, in accordance with the 2 CFR 200. We have to calculate this manually since the rate is multiplied by MTDC and not the total project budget. Grantees with no federally approved indirect cost rate may use a rate of 10% of modified total direct costs, MTDC. Grantees with a federally approved rate may use that rate according to the method in their agreement, such as salary only, salary and fringe, or MTDC. So what is modified total direct costs? It means all direct salaries and wages, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel, and up to the first $25,000 of each subaward. It excludes equipment, capital expenditures, charges for patient care, rental costs, tuition remission, scholarships and fellowships, participant support costs, and the portion of each subaward that is over $25,000. So our total direct costs, if we added all of these budget categories up, comes out to $289,000 and change. But that is not our MTDC rate or number. Our MTDC, our modified total direct cost, is actually $275,737. That is because there are some things in this budget that aren't eligible for MTDC. So if you remember, we have equipment in our budget and we have rent in our budget. Those are not eligible for our indirect costs. So that's why this number is a little bit less than our total direct costs. So 289,000 all of our total costs, and we take out equipment, we take out rental costs, we get this 275 number. We slap the 10% rate on it, and that's how we come out to this $27,000. So you add our total direct costs plus this indirect cost here, and that's how you would get our total budget of $316,000. And this is our example of a federal grant budget. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Marja, who has a nice PowerPoint presentation on federal grant budgets. Thank you all for your time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dexter, for giving us that detailed explanation as to a sample of what the budgets look like. And bear with me as I am pulling this up. I am not at my computer, so it's a little different using my mouse today. I guess the screens are a little out of order. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this federal grant budgets. And again, like I said, my name is Marja Furman. I am the ARP compliance specialist. And let's go to slide 1. All right. Federal grants pay the recipients or subrecipients actual cost of operating the grant-funded project. If you budget $5,000 to buy 5 laptop computers at $1,000 each, but buy the computers during a sale and only spend $4,500, the grant will pay only the $4,500 in actual cost. If 50% of an employee's salary is budgeted to the grant, but the employee works only 47% of his time on the grant, only 47% of his actual salary and fringe costs may be charged to the grant. And Dexter really gave a good explanation about the salaries and how that was to work. So basically, you don't want to, although it may state in your budget that it is budgeted out for that this particular employee is going to work 50% of the time. But this is a good reason why you must actually track your employees' time, because although you may have it budgeted for 50%, they may only work 40% of the time. And you want to charge for what they actually work. You don't want to charge more just because that's what's listed on the budget, because then we might fall into what Jason presented earlier, which is fraud. All right, let's go on to our next slide. The Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs website provides the following guidance for developing budgets. A well-prepared budget should be reasonable and demonstrate that the funds being asked for will be used wisely. The budget should be as concrete and specific as possible in its estimates. Make every effort to be realistic to estimate costs accurately. The budget format should be as clear as possible. It should begin with a budget narrative, which you should write after the entire budget has been prepared. Budget narratives may also be called budget justifications. And Dexter really just gave a great example of what the format should look like on the budget. And he actually broke down each line item, which as long as you have already given Susan your email, you will get a copy of these slides as well. So going on to our next slide, which is a copy of the budget narrative justification. So, for instance, and I know Dexter has gone over this, but I'm going to break this portion down again, because we need to know, like, where is this particular person going? So in line item 1, you say purpose of travel. They're going to a grantee conference. Well, where are they going? They're going to Washington, D.C. How are they going to get there? Well, they have airfare. Okay, well, how much is the flight? Well, the flight is $200, but we have 2 individuals that are going. So your total cost is going to be $400. Also, Dexter did go over local travel as well. Well, in this particular instance, the line item number 2, these individuals did travel, and the mileage that they traveled was 3,000 miles at 38 cents a mile. And 38 times 3,000 will give you $1,140. You also see that, I don't want to leave this out, that they did have a per diem, which is their meals and incidentals, which is budgeted out as $46 a day times 2 people, which will give you a total of $184. And also their hotel stays for at $180 a night times 2 people, which is a total of $720, which would give a total of all of these line items cost of $2,444 for that particular trip to the grantee conference that is located in Washington, D.C. Okay. Now, you will also need to write out a justification as well. So you've listed this on your budget as your line items, but now you need to give a justification. You need to describe the purpose of the travel and how the costs were determined. Well, you had 2 staff members, which was a project director and an evaluator, that was going to attend this mandatory grantee meeting in Washington, D.C. But also local travel was needed to be able to attend the local meetings and project activities and training. So this is a good justification as to why you need this amount of money to be budgeted into your budget for travel. All right, to our next slide. Each section of the budget should be in outline form, listing line items under major headings and subheadings. Each of the major components should be subtotaled with a grand total at the end. Remember to include computations that clearly show how the costs were derived. And we just went over an example that broke down each line item. This showed the heading. I can go back up to it. This showed the heading, which is purpose of travel, location, item, rate, cost, and the listing line under major headings and subheadings. So not only did I give an example, but Dexter also gave an example as well of what these line items should look like. And remember to include computations that clearly show how the costs were derived. Dexter gave you a great example of how to calculate those costs, and which is going to cause you to have to brush off that algebraic skills so that you can calculate these costs. All right, let's go to our next slide. When developing your budget, follow the federal cost principles to ensure all costs are allowable, reasonable, allocable. Correctly allocating costs to the budget is very important, as the grant should not pay costs that do not benefit the grant itself. Okay? Also adhere to the requirements listed in the federal notice of funding opportunity, as some federal grant programs restrict certain types of costs. Definitely, this is so important. This last sentence right here, where it says that you want to adhere to the requirements listed in the federal notice of funding opportunity. You do not want to put a cost in your budget that may be against the guidelines for NOFO. So definitely make sure that you double check that when you are creating your budget. All right. Even when you take great effort to develop an accurate budget, actual costs are likely to differ from budgeted costs. Additionally, throughout the life of the grant, it might become clear that funds are needed for a cost that was not anticipated at the time the budget was created. For these reasons, the federal government and Louisville Metro government will allow grantees to submit budget revision requests. In Gov grants, these are called budget redirection amendment requests. Keep in mind that for grants awarded directly from the federal government to your organization, the budget revision request might take several months. That is very important to remember. So these next slides is going to be an example of how to do a budget redirection amendment request in GovGrants. And there's also information on the OMB website too that would give you more information about this as well. In GovGrants, first you want to go to Management. Next, you want to click on New. Then you want to go over here to this category right here, and you want to select Budget Redirection. After you select Budget Redirection, you just hit Save and Continue. And that's just a brief example of how to do a budget redirection in GovGrants. All right, it's everyone's favorite time. It's quiz time. I wish I had a bell. Ding, 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 ding. Dexter said that he's going to be giving away the prizes today. So he said it's going to come out of his own funds. I'm just playing with you, Dexter. All right, question number 1. Federal grant budgets should include A, best estimated cost plus profit margin, B, best estimate of cost, C, best estimated cost plus no more than 15% profit margin. All right, yep, that is correct. I'm seeing a lot of B's. Good job. All right, question number 2. How can a grantor best understand the budgeted cost? A, applicants should include cost computation in the budget. B, applicants should include explanation in the budget. Or C, both A and B. Then a lot of C's. And y'all sure it's not B? I'm just joking with you. Yes, the correct answer is C. Excellent job. All right, question number 3. If you need to request a change in your ARP grant budget, select which of the following options in GovGrants. A, budget change amendment, B, budget redirection amendment, or C, budget period change amendment. I couldn't get you guys on that one, could I? Yeah, I know, I just started. I just read over that last one. So yeah, B is the correct answer. And last question. Allowable costs never differ across federal grant programs. A, true, B, false. All right, you guys have nailed it. And yes, the answer is B. All right, that is my time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer.
Awesome. Thank you, Marja. And thank you, Jason and Dexter as well. We do have a few minutes to open up for questions. Jason, one has already come through the chat. Are you able to share the last slide that you had with the contact information for fraud? We can email it over as well, but if you're able to share. And any other questions, if you'll just direct them to the chat, we will answer as many as we can get through, if there are any. All right, and Jason has shared the phone numbers and contacts for fraud. Thank you, Jason. All right, we have a question from Brenda. Why does the budget redirection take several months? Brenda, are you referring to the budget redirections in the grant management system? Or I'm not fully understanding your question.
At Metro, for Metro, and we have the ability to do the budget redirections on ARP subawards without going back to the federal government. Those are fairly quick. We do have to get the approval of OMB, the Louisville Accelerator team, and the Metro agency that awarded the funds. Once we have that, that process might take a week. It might take 7 days if someone is on vacation. 7 business days, but sometimes we can have it done by the next day. At the federal level, If you have a grant, say from the Department of Justice, you can ask them for a budget revision, but at any one time, they might have quite a few requests ahead of yours, and they're also working on a lot of other grants and projects, and so it could take quite some time. We don't have to worry about that with ARP, but those of you who have other federal grants, you might have had this experience that the federal government doesn't let you know for 3 or 4 months.
Thank you, Susan. No other questions so far have come into the chat, but I just wanted to remind everyone if any questions do come up after the presentation or we didn't get to any questions that you put in previously in the chat, feel free to reach out to anyone on the OMB compliance team and we can get those answered for you or connected to someone who can answer them for you. The slides and recording will be available on the Louisville Metro grantee resource page. And if there's no other questions, just look out for the next invitation to future Lunch and Learns. Thank you, Jason, Dexter, and Marja for all the content, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Tuesday. Thank you all for coming and attending and participating in the quizzes.
I think there's a couple of us that wanted to hang on after